Cindi, she was the former editor of, Glamour Magazine, Editor-in-Chief of Glamour Magazine. She started the impactful Glamour Women of the Year, not just the award, but the program and everything. She's been a big champion for women's rights and all this stuff. And she's also been a good friend to me, and as a mentor, she's allowed me and other men, especially during this time, to welcome in an arena and a place where women are having a conversation so we can learn. So thank you, Cindi, for that. I really appreciate it. And then Cecile, she is a national leader for women's rights and social and economic justice, author of New York Times bestseller Make Trouble, which I love that thing, and which is on sale, by the way. It's signed for you all. She's a former president of Planned Parenthood, worked tirelessly to increase affordable access to reproductive health care and to build a healthier and safer world for women and young people. She began her career as a labor organizer, working with women who earn minimum wage, started her own grassroots organization, later served as Deputy Chief of Staff to Nancy Pelosi, and on Time's 100 Most Influential Place. So, ladies and gentlemen, Cindi and Cecile.
And thank you so much. I think we're both so grateful, not just that you had us here tonight, but also for your leadership as a man, because not every more of it. Yeah, yes. We need more of it, and in a day and age when a lot of men are like, it kind of scares me to talk about that stuff, and I don't want to get into talking about women's equality. You've always welcomed it before it was trendy.
Thank you. Yes.
And what an awesome shot.
Ah, thank you.
Yeah, can we give it up for this beautiful?
So we were just talking about how there's no particular structure for this conversation, and Prabal has instructed us to be uncensored. So here we go. And we want to take questions from all of you guys, of course. Okay, where do we start?
Well, I love that. I do want to say, I think it's really is important that this is happening a couple of days before the Third Women's March, and I just want to. I feel like it was 2 years ago that things in this country completely changed, and so I just want to give it up for all the women and the men who supported the women who made that first march happen and who continue to march and continue to organize. I think this is a historic time, and so I'm really excited that we can actually be here right now, 2 years later, to talk about where we are.
Exactly, and it should be noted that some of the women who were instrumental in the many marches around the world, marches at which I think an estimated 4.5 to 5 million women turned out, are actually in this room. Yes. So can you guys raise your hands?
Yes.
And can we give it up?
Yes. Yes.
One of the things that I learned from getting to know so many of these women, and it sounds so obvious, and you know this, Cecile, because you come from, your mother, Anne Richards was not only governor of Texas, but a huge community organizer. That's the background that you come from as well. But I think there's so many people, it sort of seemed on that day 2 years ago when 5 million women turned out, that it was like, oh, it just magically happened. Like women were angry, and so they rose up, and here they are. And that is true, but there's also a huge amount of organizing and planning that goes into, not just an action like that, but into any kind of grassroots movement. And I think it's just really, important to recognize the vast amount of work that it takes to, really get a social movement off the ground.
And to sustain it. And I think that's what's just been incredible to me. And I've been trying to say to reporters who are looking at what's happening, and to say the march wasn't the end, it was just the beginning.
Yeah.
It changed everything. And there is no way we would have had a record number of women going to Congress this year. And I'm sure we all just cheered and cried and celebrated seeing the diversity, certainly in the House of Representatives for the very first time. And it all, it didn't all start that day. Obviously, women have been fighting these fights for years, but it wouldn't have been possible, I think, without the work that happened. So it's important to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and okay, so let's talk about some of those victories since then. I mean, obviously, we just had more than 100 women elected to Congress. That's thrilling. You've talked a lot about the significance of the number of women of color who ran this time around. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, well, it's just, it's interesting because I think, and thank goodness, finally, largely, I think, because of women's magazines, starting with your leadership years ago in Glamour, beginning to actually talk about things in addition to the things we love, like makeup and hair and fashion, also talking about issues in politics and women's leadership, that now women are getting covered, and that it's not only a couple of women who have gotten a lot of ink, but it's women like Lauren Underwood, the young woman from Illinois who took on 6 men in her primary, beat them all, then went on to beat the incumbent and win the general election. In her 30s, a nurse, the first African-American woman to represent her district. I mean, this is, and she is going places, right? I mean, but she's just, I could go down the list. From my own home state of Texas, I don't know if we have any other Texans in the room or maybe some Texans watching, but we don't always have something to brag about in Texas, but, but when we do, boy, we brag. But we have the first 2 Latina congresswomen ever, Veronica Escobar and Sylvia Garcia, serving in Congress now. I mean, it's been way too long, but I just think there's exciting signs everywhere. And these are women who came to work. They came because they wanted to make a difference, and you can already tell that.
Right, and they weren't necessarily encouraged by the party. I mean, in some cases, maybe they were, but in many cases, they weren't, right?
In many cases, they weren't. That's right.
Well, sidebar, why is that?
Well, I just think change is something that makes people uncomfortable, and that includes any institution. And I think that's the exciting thing, is to see women who, to me, the lesson of today is, start before you're ready, and don't wait for instructions. And I think that's what's happened, is women are just saying, if I wait until I'm ready, or until someone asks me and invites me, it's going to be way too long. And so we had women just jump in who'd never run for office before. And I think, frankly, it's kind of actually why my mother got into office the first time. She looked around and she looked at the men in office. She said, I know I could do a better job than that guy. And that is, in some ways, I think women looked at what was happening in Washington, and they said, I think I have something to contribute, and they do.
Right. It's so interesting. I mean, I first of all love both of those things. Don't wait for instructions and start before you're ready. And start before you're ready is something that typically, I mean, this is not just in politics, this is in work too. Men have been more willing to do than women, and people have been more willing to accept men doing than women, right? In business, the classic situation has been that, and I think this is backed up by studies, that people will take a chance on a man getting a job that he's never done the work of before, but a woman typically has to do the work of the next rung up before she actually gets that title and gets that promotion. And I think, a lot of us have probably been conditioned to expect that it's always the way. And it's so liberating to see. Yeah, you too?
Me too. I mean, it's funny, I wrote about it in my book that I almost didn't go to my interview at Planned Parenthood because I was running a nonprofit, but I was like, I don't know how to do that job. I've never done anything like that. And I was literally like this close to not showing up with the search firm, and I dropped into a coffee shop to do, of course, the one thing that any adult woman would do, and that's call my mother. I said, Mom, I can't do this. Like the kids and this. And she said, Cecile, get over yourself. If you don't go for that interview, you will always regret not having tried. And thank God for Ann Richards. She's the reason I actually did go. But I feel like all of us, we suffer from that. And I have so many young women who've come to me and said, I don't know, I don't have the right degree yet, or I don't, haven't done these things. And I love men, but I have never had a man say to me, I just don't think I'm quite ready for that promotion. I just don't think I can do that yet. So yes, we have a lot of work to do. And I think the exciting thing is women see other women succeeding and doing things that are bold and audacious and scary, and then they get so excited about supporting them, and they go, well, I think I'll do that too.
Yeah, right. It's
infectious.
Yeah, exactly. It's, what do they call it? Big uterus energy?
Yes. You can say that now, that's good.
Right, that's what we should be aspiring to. Okay, so you mentioned your mom, and I don't know how much people in this room know about your mom, and I just was identifying her before. Legendary governor of Texas, Ann Richards. Obviously it's impossible to distill the impact that growing up with her as a mom had on you as a person, but try anyway.
Well, I mean, I think she was one of these women which I think people forget, and I think it's important to remember, she didn't come spring full forth out of Waco, Texas as this feminist icon, right? I mean, she grew up when women had very few opportunities. It wasn't until much later in life, and really it wasn't until the women's movement came around, she went, oh my God, there's something more than like raising these 4 kids and making dinner every night. And that's when she decided to run for office. But and so I think, I guess to sum it up, she was a big believer in this is the only life you have. So don't wait. If there's an opportunity, the answer is yes. Do it now, because you're only gonna regret the things you don't try. And so, I mean, people say now, what she think, I regret that she died before Twitter, because she would be. Can you imagine? There's one person she would completely give a run for his money on Twitter. But also she would just be so excited because to see young women now running and not waiting their turn.
Yeah.
And that to me that's the whole lesson, is just don't wait your turn.
Yeah, I think I want to needle point that pillow, actually. That's amazing.
But I'm going to ask you, so you're asking me all these questions.
Sorry,
I'm
this is,
I know it's kind of like the call into like these. No, but I just think it's because I haven't got glamour, and for all of us in the women's movement, you were this iconic, like, just damn the torpedoes, change things, talk about women's issues, endorse Hillary Clinton in a women's, I mean, things that no one ever did. You were always out there, and to me, you changed what the industry was about. And I mean, what can you tell us about that, and what should we be expecting and hoping for? And how are women now going to get the news we need now that you're gone?
There are plenty of sources. Thank you. That was all incredibly lovely and flattering, and especially, you know, coming from you, because you've always been one of my idols, as you know. You know, I think I mean, I certainly learned from a lot of people that the right move, if you're editing for women, is, you know, not to underestimate the intelligence of your audience. And my first boss, or she was really my boss's boss's boss in magazines, was the legendary editor of Glamour, Ruth Whitney. And she was this very sort of imposing Midwestern woman, but she was very no-nonsense, quite feminist. I remember once a reporter asked her whether she was a feminist, which might at the time, I mean, this was sort of like, you know, probably mid-90s, have been a controversial question to ask a fashion magazine editor, and she said, well, what's the alternative? I love that. I mean, really, what is the alternative? And so she, you know, she was very sort of forthright. But one thing I always think about, and I was just recently telling somebody about this, after the 1991 Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill Senate Judiciary Committee hearings, which you guys were probably all born after, but Anita Hill testified over the course of a long weekend. It was a Columbus Day weekend in October of 1991, and she testified about the behavior of Clarence Thomas, who was at the time nominated for and then confirmed to the Supreme Court. He had been her boss, and she was accusing him of sexual harassment, and she was not treated particularly well during those hearings.
She was treated terribly.
Yes, she was treated terribly by a number of people who were actually still on that same committee and showed up on your TV sets during the Kavanaugh hearings this fall. So some things never change, but they will. Anyway, she handled herself beautifully during those hearings. She's an incredibly impressive woman and is to this day. And I remember my boss came in on that Tuesday morning, and she said, I want to rip up the issue that we've just put to bed. It was the Glamour Women of the Year issue that year. And I want to make Anita Hill a Woman of the Year. And the sort of public opinion jury was still very much out on Anita Hill, right? Like, a lot of people were like, I don't know, I've heard she slept around. I mean, there was a lot of really derogatory, awful stuff going around. And one of our senior editors said to Ruth, well, don't you want to wait and just sort of see what, like, the second day buzz is on this story? And she drew herself up and said, I don't have to wait to see what the buzz is. I heard her testify, and I believe her.
Oh, wow.
And it was such a, like, I mean, I was a baby little assistant editor at the time. They weren't letting me get anywhere near the Women of the Year awards, but it made such an impact on me, just the, you know, the power of making your own decisions and sticking to them. And of course now in retrospect, we're at this moment where like everybody's carrying around, I believe, Anita Hill tote bags, but that was not the mood then, and she still was just so willing to stand by a woman who she clearly felt had credibility. Anyway, so I learned things like that from her, and I also learned that, women respond to that. I mean, part of the reason I was able to, cover serious subjects at Glamour and expand our coverage to include global issues and take stands on things like reproductive rights and, endorsing Hillary Clinton, was because, not every reader responded to it. We did get, some hate mail, but there was a core readership that I think felt, oh, here's a brand that understands that, I can care about my rights as a woman and also be interested in fashion and beauty. So women were there, which allowed us to be there.
I love that story because I actually was at the dinner when she was awarded, and I didn't know the backstory.
Oh my
of Anita
gosh,
Hill.
because your mom won that year.
That's right. That's really crazy. What a year.
Wow. Do you know that your mother at that event? Because
I really want to. God knows what she said.
No. I did go to the awards, although I didn't have a seat because I didn't merit a seat, and I didn't get to go to the dinner. But I was in the elevator with your mother, and I think she was like putting on her name tag or something, and she said something about always wearing the name tag on the right.
Always.
Yes,
because
which
when
I
you're
didn't
shaking
know.
hands.
Is that what it is?
That's why then, yes, because then immediately you see them.
Oh. I didn't understand.
That's an original Ann Richards.
I put on a name tag, and I was like, I know what side it goes on, and that's because of Ann Richards. So anyway, yes.
That's good. No, she was full of practical advice.
Yeah.
No, but that was a great year, an important year, and it has been amazing to see Anita Hill. Not only that she was such a heroine then, but continues to be today.
Yes, she wrote a really beautiful piece in the New York Times. In fact, right before the testimony of Christine Blasey Ford, talking about what we could do as a country to get it right, which I'm not sure we did. So.
Yeah, I'd say we didn't actually. Yeah.
I mean, but even in the treatment of
No, I mean it's really yes, and I think that's. We talk about like there's been so many highs in the last 2 years. I think women feeling empowered and feeling like to see women beat back the efforts to defund Planned Parenthood or beat back the efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act and rushing to support families and oppose family separation. All the amazing things that have happened. I do think the lowest point for a lot of women was the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh, and just feeling that despite however much progress we've made, to see sexual harassment and assault and to see survivors speak publicly how little impact in some corners it still makes. And there's a long way to go.
We absolutely do. You referenced family separation, and I just want to give credit to Paola Mendoza, who's sitting at the back, who was really instrumental in the Families Belong Together campaign. Thank you a lot. Thank you all around.
Well, I mean, that's, and again, love men. Glad a lot of you are here, or some of you are here. That shows like
quite a few of you are here.
Yes, exactly. But it has been amazing to see women kind of rushing in on every major issue, and again, leading not only the resistance, but I think also increasingly, I believe, organizing for the kind of world we want to live in, not just kind of world we don't want to live in. And that to me is like that's got to be our next phase. Is not only resisting but persisting, and now building and growing a country where we actually have full equality.
Right.
Which, what a radical idea.
Yeah. It's very simple. We were talking before about the midterms, so let's talk about 2020 for a second. It's kind of extraordinary that I think 4 Democrats have declared and 3 of them have been women so far. Do I have my numbers right?
Well, definitely 3 women have declared.
I mean, definitely 3 women. I don't know if I got the 4 right. But at any rate, what do we think the impact of having, at 3 and presumably several more women in the race will be?
I don't know, what do you use? I think it's incredibly exciting. I don't know what the rest of you, but just like, and they're all very different, and they all come from different backgrounds, and they have, just like all of us, right? It's like women are not a monolith, and we don't have to, every woman doesn't have to represent every single woman in the universe. So I think it's terribly exciting, and, reporters keep asking, well, so last election cycle, women were 54% of the electorate, okay? So overwhelmingly, the majority of voters, women contributed $100 million more to political campaigns and candidates this last 2 years than they did even in the year that Hillary Clinton ran for president. So in terms of women, showing up to phone bank, to door knock, to run for office, to contribute, women are really literally the most important political force in the country right now. And so if another reporter asks me whether men will vote for a woman, I just want to say, I think actually it is a different question. The question is, how are we going to get getting these women to vote for a man for president because now they have another option? And so I just think we have to really think about this completely. It's a different world now. And I mean, that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I think the point is, I think a woman is going to be on the Democratic ticket someplace. And that's something I don't think we've ever said with confidence before. And I mean, it might even be two, who knows?
Yeah.
But it is really exciting. And I think, I think it's our time.
Do you think, I have this hope that that having so many women in the race will inoculate us somewhat against that thing of like, there's just something about her that doesn't seem like president, or I don't know, her voice annoys me, or, all those things that people say that are kind of code for, I just can't see that kind of human with those chromosomes in this role. Do you think having so many women will just, automatically, maybe not automatically, but at least, largely eradicate that and
Well, look, I mean, Kirsten, the first thing they asked her was like, do you think you're likable enough? So the questions are still going to happen. The questions are still going to come. I think the amazing thing is, and there's a lot of women in this room who are part of this, is that there is now an amazing social media presence and following across this country, that the minute any of that happens, women call it out. And we know that didn't happen with Hillary. I mean, the first time around when she was running, in the primary, even with President Obama, and then this last election, but Tarana Burke said something the other night that I just love, which is, she said, people say to me, well, it's so great that women are finally speaking up and speaking out. And she said, I'm sorry, women have been speaking out for centuries. It's just that we have finally found a frequency where people can hear us, and we're not going to give it up. And that to me is that women, we now have a frequency and not afraid to use it. And that to me is what's going to change. So I feel like, and I see the press being called on this in a way that they never have been before, and more women in the media, more women reporters, not near enough. But that's changing everything. More women of color in the media who, can really call out and are calling out all kinds of things that just went unnoticed.
Yeah, which is amazing and so necessary, because just to throw a little shade on my own profession here, everybody thinks of journalism and media as like, oh, it's so liberal, it's it's so progressive. But the truth is that if you look at gender equality in the global media, the media industry lags behind a lot of other industries. It is appalling. And if you look at the status of women of color in this country, newsrooms actually decreased slightly over the last 5 years.
Is that right?
Yeah, and for women of color, it's been especially difficult. So, I think there's sometimes this, assumption that the media sort of has it all figured out on progressive issues, and it absolutely doesn't. So any calling on the carpet that happens in the field of journalism, I think, is completely welcome. Tarana Burke, you were referencing, is, for those who might not know, who are listening, is the woman who I believe now 12 years ago founded the Me Too movement and has been an activist on behalf of women, and especially women in communities of color, ever since. And you're talking about women speaking on that frequency. I thought it was interesting. Ashley Judd also has said several times that people say to her it's so great that you finally spoke out. And she was like, I've been telling this story since Harvey Weinstein did this to me, however many years ago that was. And nobody wanted to print it. Nobody would run with the story. Nobody felt they could stand up to his lawyers. So I do think that idea of women finally raising their voices is just not the case. It's been happening.
No, that's right. And I spent the last few months not only going around and campaigning for folks that were running for office, most of whom won, which was really exciting for the first time in my life, but also listening to women. And I think what I've been hearing consistently from women, and a lot of them in the middle of the country, is they just want to hear more about what women are doing and how they can be part of it and how they can support other women. Because I feel like there is this sense a little bit like of isolation. And so, I mean, I think one of the things that you and I have been talking about is how can we make sure that women across the world and across the country do feel connected and supported. And I think part of that is making sure they actually find out information that isn't sometimes covered by the mainstream press. I think women's stories, there's and stories of women of color are covered a little bit more, but still largely not. And so, what are your as you see the media world changing? How are we going to tackle this? How are you going to make sure that women actually can get the information they want to just feel empowered and feel like they can support other women?
I mean, I think you're right that there's a need. People are confused, and I mean the fact that I am getting, and I'm not like the leader of the women's movement by a long stretch, and I get random DMs on Instagram for people saying like, what do I do about this issue?
Yes.
And usually I direct them to one of the people in this room. But there is, I think, a hunger for that kind of information. I mean, I would say, social media helps there. Sometimes it hurts because there's a huge amount of disinformation, obviously, as we know, on the social media platforms, but I think it allows people who care about issues to bypass the opinions of editors. You don't have to care about, it doesn't matter whether the editor-in-chief of a magazine that you follow or your hometown newspaper deems your issue important. If you find an activist who cares about it, who you can follow and who you can trust, then they can share information and you can share it out from there. Beyond that, I think women just have to continue to raise their voices about the need for this information. Should reach out to reporters, reach out to editors if they're, scaring you with a story but not telling you what you can do about it. Tell them that you want and need that information.
Yeah. I think it's a good point. I think one of the things I've been struck by too is how much, I think when you get to Congress or Washington, I think women's issues are thought of basically that like we have a uterus, and so that's kind of mainly what we think about all the time. And we do think about that a lot. It's incredibly important. But there are a lot of other issues that women are raising to me that just frankly are absent from the conversation. Like the fact that affordable child care is almost non-existent in this country, that we have like no plan. You don't have to scratch the surface very far. Women kept raising for me the issue of affordable housing. That in a lot of parts of the country, they don't know how they're going to actually keep their families where they are. There was just a recent, I think I sent it to you, this incredible story, I think it was on CBS, just about the fact that the absence of paid family leave and the lack of support for women who are having children is one of the reasons that the fertility rate is going down in this country, because women can't literally figure out how they're going to afford to have children. So my dream is that in this coming election, not only that we have great women candidates, that frankly we have issues that are never talked about in presidential politics come to the fore. Right. And I think women can make that happen.
Imagine that? I mean, a question on,
yes,
I can too.
That's what I have in my mind's eye, right there.
Yes. But I mean, how is it that every presidential candidate isn't fully expected, every congressional candidate isn't fully expected to be able to talk off the top of his or her head about child care? I mean, it's such a fundamental issue. It's one of the, the most universal challenges facing women and men in this country.
Yeah,
right now.
no, facing families, absolutely. Well, I think this is the time to make it different. I mean, I think it is, and I think it's, again, I think the Women's March not only, have like fueled that, now women have started organizations all across the country. As I told you, I went to Ohio the other day. You can't throw a rock without hitting a new women's group. It's like, like the badass babes of Bay City. Everywhere. It's like women are just, they don't know what they're doing, but by God, they're organizing. And it's really exciting. And so I think now if we could like channel all that into real political power and a demand that women's equality and our participation is taken seriously, in addition to having great candidates, then we're going to change this next century.
Okay, so how are we going to do that?
Yeah, we're going to organize. Okay. I think it's what women are doing. So anyway, maybe I should see if anyone has questions. I don't know. I feel like I've been bad.
Do you guys have questions?
No, this is such a smart audience. I recognize a lot of people.
I know. I have like 1,000 more questions for Cecile, but I want to pause and take your questions, if any.
Yeah. My name's Erica. Thank you for your time.
Take my
Oh, here. Mine doesn't have it.
Oh, that's okay. I'm supposed to. So I moved to New York last year from Georgia, and I worked on Stacey Abrams' campaign.
Can we just like
Sadly, we know she's not the new governor. And I was struck by you saying that now it's our time, it's women's time. But I fear that it's not for everyone. And I would like your thoughts on how we strategically organize to protect ourselves from the white women who voted for the Brian Kemps and the Roy Moores and the Trumps. Because we know that there are a lot of people who look like me, who didn't vote like me, but who share a lot of the same values, supposedly, and probably would have a lot to say to you about affordable childcare and affordable housing and all of that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, Erica, thank you, and I'm sure Cindi has some thoughts with this. This is something I think about a lot too, which is how could we, because I do believe as women there is more that we share in common than what keeps us apart in the terms of basic issues, but the issues of race and privilege are still so profound, certainly in the parts of the country that I come from, and we absolutely saw that in Georgia in Stacey's race, and I think it means for a lot of us white women, we have a lot more work to do, reaching out to our sisters and talking to them and bringing them in and calling them in, and also doing it in coalition and in partnership with women of color. I feel like there's, so we've got a long way to go, and you're right, there are women who I think are perhaps don't believe in feminism. They don't necessarily believe in women's equality for whatever host of reasons. They don't think they're the majority. So I don't feel like we have to spend all of our trying to reach the furthest out we possibly can. But there are millions of women in this country who aren't engaged politically. For a whole host of reasons, and I'm sure if you worked in Georgia, you saw a little bit of either too busy, don't care, doesn't know that it matters. And I just think that means it's organizing work that we all have to do. And I think the reason I'm glad you raised Georgia is it's not going to happen from Washington down. This is going to happen from the grassroots up. So what I really believe in is we have to invest in organizing, not just at election time, but year in, year out with women. To say if we're going to really build the kind of country where we can raise families, where everyone's safe, where kids are taken care of, where public schools are funded, that's going to mean we all have to pull together. And I feel like we've seen some glimmers of that, but we're definitely not there yet. I'm glad you raised Stacey too, just because I have to say, I said this when she was nominated, she is the most incredible political leader, I believe, that ran for election this year. And this is not the end, as we know, for Stacey. This is just it's not even the beginning. My God, she's been doing this work for her entire lifetime. But I'm glad that we have to continue to lift her up and raise her name, because the fact that I feel like a lot of men did a lot of press and a lot of conversation, but Stacey Abrams was, to me, the most important story that happened this election cycle, and we need to stick with her and keep pushing her forward. But thanks for doing that work.
Yeah, well done. I do think just to add on to that, only the tiniest bit, I think the fact that voter suppression and voters' rights are being discussed in a slightly more kind of mainstream way than they might have been a year ago is another sign of hope. A small sign, obviously, the work needs to be done, but the fact that I think a larger number of people understand that, there are very complex forces that are invested in keeping some people away from the polls.
Because then they don't show up to the Secretary of State election, which would help change that.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah. But Cindy's exactly right. And I do think this is actually work that women and the women's movement has to be front and center on, is not only that we take away barriers for voting, but that every vote is counted. And that's the thing that I think Stacey lifted up, that people are so unaware of. It's not only that millions of people are disenfranchised from even being able to vote, but even once they do vote, their votes aren't counted. There was a great federal decision today, actually, just in Wisconsin, just on the slightly, like, you know, every once in a while there's a, you know, all these, in the lame duck where they passed all these, you know, new restrictions on voting, they just were enjoined by a federal judge in Wisconsin. So I feel like this is work that we have to do state by state by state, and make voting easier. And I think we have to start by we should make the election day a federal holiday, and then, you know, send a signal that we actually believe that voting should be available.
I mean, it's bananas.
It's crazy.
It is, it's crazy.
You would almost think they don't want people to vote.
Think that.
Other questions? So I have a question on our Preble Live Instagram, or it's not so much a question, but one of our followers is asking mental health.
You want to go?
Well, I mean, one of the things, I'm not an expert in this arena, although I would obviously say that I think for all of us, I don't know if this is someone from the US or around, or somewhere else, but I mean, it's been amazing to see young people actually taking the lead on demanding gun safety and gun reform. But what I also hear from young people consistently on the road is the lack of mental health services for young people in schools, and even from going on college campuses and hearing, you know, RAs say, I don't have any place to even send the kids my school who need mental health services. So I think that our lack of attention, and of course the lack of attention to healthcare and healthcare access writ large, is a huge problem. But the fact that we still stigmatize and do not take care of mental health issues in this country is a huge problem. I mean, both of these things are issues. They're joined, but they're also distinctly, they're distinct problems in and of themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I just echo the incredible sort of inspiration that it is to see young people, not just the kids from Parkland, but so many teenagers in so many different communities around the world, but specifically in this country, take the lead on this issue and just be so fearless about it, which is of course what we all need to continue to do. On that mental health question, I recently heard Nancy Lublin, who you guys might know is the founder of Crisis Text Line, which is a great resource, by the way, for anybody who, it's essentially the text equivalent of 911. I believe it's 741 in the United States. If you're anybody, not just a teenager, who is having an issue that you need help with, you can text that number and you get a trained counselor. She said that they recently saw a spike unlike anything that they'd ever seen before. And when they filtered, they can data filter and see what the most popular terms are in all of their emergency calls. And they saw that the word that kept coming up over and over again over one particular week in December was finals. And you know, that just, it sent like chills down my spine, because you know, we can see the incredible pressure that so many kids are under or feel they're under. And I think, you know, underlying all of these issues that we're talking about, but, you know, specifically that one, you know, is just the importance of us sending one another the message that, you know, we're good enough as we are, you know, that you are enough. Which in no way takes away from the extreme and urgent importance of gun reform in this country. But, you know, those issues do go hand in hand.
I think the other thing that's really, I mean, just to call out one other person who went to Congress that you may not know yet, but I want you to like put her on your, like, whatever, Google alert, is a woman named Lucy McBath from Georgia, who I see some of you shaking your heads, and I mean, and maybe one of the incredible sort of silver linings of a really dark day in Georgia was her election. But you know, Lucy lost her son to gun violence in Florida, and it was out of it that she learned how broken the criminal justice system is, and she committed to work on that, and ran for Congress and won. And so I think it's women like Lucy going to Congress who are not just going to Congress to take up a seat. She's actually there to do something about the criminal justice system and gun safety. And so that to me is the other exciting thing, is that I think the women that came there, and this is generally true if you look at the research, that when women get elected to office, they pass more legislation, they work across party lines, they co-sponsor more bills. Yes, I mean, they get shit done, and that is... might even be fewer shutdowns. Believe me. So it's anyway, I think it's gonna be an interesting time, because I think they're gonna force some conversations around gun safety that we have not had.
So the tone in today's world is just so negative and harsh, and you both made some incredibly difficult and public decisions in your careers, and I'm wondering, you know, when there's like a bloodbath around those decisions, how do you stand up against them and brace yourself and just move forward with what you've decided to do?
I mean, I feel almost like an imposter answering that question when I'm next to Cecile, because I do feel that you know, I mean, you've withstood such incredible, you know, torrential vitriol. You know, I see it, like, if I slide into your mentions on Twitter, you know, I see it, and I'm
Don't
sure.
read that comments.
Yeah, that's one of the coping strategy.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I mean, I've been lucky in that, you know, the risks that I've taken have often not felt all that risky. Like, you know, you mentioned endorsing Hillary Clinton. Like, you know, like, what's the worst that could have happened? Like, they could have fired me. I mean, I would have lived. You know, I mean, I actually just, you know, throwing it back to Cecile. You know, I was very inspired, and we talked about this, and I wrote about this. You know, last winter, you and I were on Morning Joe together.
Yes.
And afterward, I remember because I'm not as fully formed a human as you, and I do read my Twitter comments. I was on Twitter, and I just saw, like, the things that, you know, people would see your name, and they would just, like, hurl these, like, vile insults at you. And it was, you know, it's because of many reasons, but, you know, in part, it's because of Planned Parenthood that you used to run, and the organization's willingness to stand up for women's right to choose abortion, among many other things. And, you know, I just suddenly felt like, why are you're standing up there like this soldier, you know, taking shrapnel for the 25% of women who have made this choice. And here I'm gonna get verklempt, because this was like a difficult decision for me to make, to talk about, but I ended up writing a piece about it in the New York Times, writing about how I myself had an abortion when I was in college, and I just I felt an overwhelming when I was reading, you know, those comments that you were getting. I felt a sense of shame, and that's why I'm emotional, not because of the decision that I made 30 years ago, which I have never once regretted, but because I felt like I had the power to speak up, and it was slightly humbling for me to realize that it had taken me so long to do that, and just say, hey, you can't really demonize women who choose abortion, because there are so very many of us, and we are all around you, and we're mothers and sisters. We might be your boss, and we might be your assistant, and, you know, we're certainly serving in the government and the military and guarding your streets and doing all these other things that, you know, you look up to. And you just can't demonize us like that. But, you know, you were really in that position of kind of, you know, taking the heat while so many, you know, protecting a right that serves so many women well. All of which I'm not sure answers your question, except that I felt that the small thing that I could do was to say, you know, this isn't just, it's not just spokespeople who, you know, who you need to face if you oppose a woman's right to choose. It's a huge number of women in this country.
And it wasn't a small thing. It made a huge difference to me, and it was really brave. And so I do think that partly that is what keeps us all going, is the solidarity of other women. And I think too, I mean, I have so many feelings about this, but I guess the one thing I have tried to think about more this last couple of years, because it's easy for me to say, I'm an organizer, this is great, we're gonna win, you know, and not really deal with the fact that there are people in this country and outside of our country that are suffering at the hands of our government every day. People whose lives have been completely disrupted. And so it's not enough to just, you know, be the happy warrior. And partly, I think our job now, and I've never thought about this as an organizer until this last couple of years, is part of our job now is also to reach out to each other and support each other in a deeply personal and empathetic way. Because it's just not enough to be brave and bold and say we're gonna do this and that, because people are hurting. And that hurt, and the divisiveness, the hatefulness, the racism, that's on all of us. And so I do think it's important that we think about not only fighting for the better day, but taking care of each other in the process. And it's real and it's important. So thank you.
Thank you. I feel like, I mean, not to go all Pollyanna on you after that question, but I do feel like we're at a little bit of a tipping point with women supporting each other in a great way. And I mean, I don't mean that women have always been in some huge catfight up till now. Obviously, there are many strong movements and organizations that have been founded by women supporting one another, but I just see it so much now. I see it on social media with people cheering each other on. I see it in organizations with women suggesting, like even throwing to each other in meetings, or putting one another up for big jobs and promotions, or referring each other for business. And that to me is thrilling. And there is something about it right now that feels new to me. Do you feel like you see that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, like I have a couple of daughters, and I mean, their expectations about how the world's going to work is like 100% different than mine. It's so great. I mean, I just think a generational change has come, and also my son. I feel like, he's as big a feminist probably as my daughters, and so I feel like too, when I think about like why am I optimistic about the world, is that like I'm sorry, like the genie's out of the bottle. They're not going to put this back in. Women are now half the workforce. We're more than half the college students. Now, we are 103rd in the world in political representation, right behind Indonesia, so we have a lot of room to make up there. But women aren't going to quit working. Women are not going to quit being part of this economy and part of the culture and part of society. And so now we just have to find ways to actually, support each other and push forward and demand equity. And it's a different day.
I think there was another question.
Hi, I'm Emily. Thanks for speaking. It's very inspirational to hear you both. I'm someone who used to love watching political news. I used to love keeping up with the times and reading the paper, and I found recently, pretty much since Trump was elected, I was the type of person who thought, there's no way, this is just a circus, and then was very depressed for a long time once he was. That I've just started to lean out from watching CNN and the news and reading papers, and I just wanted your opinion and perspective on if you would lean in, or like how you find that balance.
I mean, we might give different answers. I don't think you need to be watching CNN and MSNBC. I think it's real healthy. I don't think so. I mean, I think you need to pay attention when when the elections come around. You need to pay attention to specific issues that touch you. If you're not a news junkie, just choose an issue that matters to you, and lean into that. I don't think it needs to be getting caught up in the 24/7 news cycle, which, let's face it, that's a hamster wheel.
It's exhausting, and I think the exciting thing is there's so many amazing women now writing, and again, we don't want to all just live in our bubble. I think there are women who are real critical thinkers, but to me, there's just so many more platforms now to be able to actually read things that are real in-depth stories about issues you might care about. And to me, that's like nurturing. That's actually what news used to be about, and that's what it should be about. I just on the way over here, I just read Rebecca Tracer's piece about the march, which was really fascinating. And it takes more than 10 seconds, right? You actually have to read it and think about it. And Rebecca's just one example of a brilliant woman writer out there. But I just feel like you can take care of yourself and you can inform yourself. And frankly, watching television, I think it doesn't really do that. And if there's something really important, someone's gonna tell you, right? And then just follow the dodo, and you can watch little every day get a little feed of some cute dog bouncing a ball on his nose or something. To me, then you've got it all covered.
I just saw a video of a little tiny burrito being made. Have you guys seen this? And then it's being fed to a hamster.
Are we gonna start sharing? Is that what we're doing? There was that
That's what I
blessing.
think you should be watching instead.
Okay, well, I just said to my daughter, there was a blessing of the animals today in Spain, and someone brought their baby hedgehog. Anyway, so just.
We endorse your right to watch whatever floats your boat. You know, I mean, I think there are a million places that you can get the news other than sort of the daily talk shows. And also, I do think it's your right as a human to say you don't necessarily want or need to get the news every day. You need to get it, but it doesn't need to be on an intravenous drip. Back there.
Hi, Max. Thank you again, both of you. Both of you have had, in your own individual ways, incredible careers and have also balanced having a family and a million other things that I'm sure we're not even aware of in your own personal lives. And as a young person who's very career-driven and focused, I'd love to hear about maybe a sacrifice that you've had to make for your career and just how to navigate those types of challenges when they come our way.
Sacrifices every day. Probably.
Yeah, although it's funny, I mean, I don't know, I have 3 kids. I've worked all my life. I don't know anything else about working. And I've been very privileged to have, and I think probably a lot of people in this room are like, do work that you love. And I worked for years organizing women who didn't have any choices about what they did. You know, they were nursing home workers, a lot of them, they cleaned hotel rooms for minimum wage, they were janitors. And so I guess I've always thought about, you know, my privilege is to get to choose to do what I want for a living, and I also got to choose to have 3 kids, and that is, you're gonna always have to like give up something, but it's pretty amazing if you think about it vis-a-vis how most people's lives are. As women, we have, you know, these women in this room, I imagine, I don't want to speak for anyone's personal circumstances, but you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine, and it's going to work out. And if you decide to have kids, and if you don't decide to have kids, that's cool too. But if you do have kids, it's like, I just can't explain it. It's the most amazing thing that ever happens. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I hate to be that way. I know that sounds kind of judgy or opinionated, but having kids changed my life. And I've always been an organizer, I've always been a social activist, but they grounded me and made me a better person. So maybe that'll happen for you too.
It's funny because my phone is buzzing, which I think is like, literally it's my son. Let's see if he can McDonald's, which I already told him we can't. I'm a good parent. I feel the same way, which is that, you know, I recognize that I come from such a position of privilege, you know, in a lot of ways, not just economically, but, you know, because I was able to have children when I wanted them and was ready to have them when I was in my 30s, and also because I have a partner, my husband, who never really had to be persuaded that child raising was part of his job. He was always the first person who was listed on the, you know, the form in elementary school. Yeah, the nurse, but, you know, they have to call someone first. And it took actually a lot of arguing with Nurse Pumpkin at PS 29 to get his name first, but once we finally got it, it was good, and then he got the calls about the stomach flu. But, you know, I mean, there are a million sacrifices. Like, you're never going to feel that you're doing everything right, and I think you just have to recognize that probably every parent before you who's paying attention has felt the same way. I mean, my mom worked, and I grew up in a community where she was really the only working mom, and she was a biochemist, and she loved her work, and she was, you know, she gave up a lot of career opportunities to raise me as a single mom, and she was home every night by, you know, like 6 or 7 for, you know, for dinner, which I think meant that she was giving up on a lot of the time in the lab that probably would have ultimately gotten her, you know, more glory in the scientific world. But, you know, I grew up understanding that work is part of what makes life joyous. If you can find something, and if you're lucky enough to be able to find something that you love to do. And nonetheless, even despite all that, I used to torture her. I remember in 4th grade coming home and being like, I just went to Diane McDonald's house, and first of all, they have a pantry. Do you know people have pantries? And in their pantry, there are just rows and rows of Pop-Tarts. I'm sure there weren't as many as I'm remembering, but, you know, I described it to my mom as they had all these different kinds of Pop-Tarts, which for those of you watching globally was a big snack in the late 70s and early 80s in the United States. And I was like, why don't we have that, and why aren't you home like Diane McDonald's mom when I get home from school to make me a Pop-Tart? And she was like, do you want me to buy you a box of Pop-Tarts? I'll buy you a box of Pop-Tarts, and then they'll be here when you get home from school. And anyway, when my own children would occasionally, when I would feel guilty or they would, say something that made me feel guilty, I would remember that. Because of course I look back on my mom's working now as this great gift and this wonderful example to me. But, I gave her a hard time at the time, and I think you just have to recognize that, there's a bit of that in parenting.
But what we can do too is fight for paid family leave for everybody in this country, right?
Yes.
Because that's what actually, some of the things that we I guess laugh about and kind of like throw off as sacrifices. It's just a reality what it's like when you don't have maternity leave, you don't have maternity care, you don't have health care coverage, all the things that millions of women in this country have to deal with. So we got to fight for everybody to have an equal chance to live the life they want to live.
Yeah, I mean, following on what you said before, if you're going to be fine, okay, you are going to be fine, but if there are moments where you're like, I'm not fine, I cannot do this without better child care, that's not on you personally, you individual parent, to solve. This is a collective issue that we have to solve as a society, and I think one of the things that women have been trained to feel is that, working mom's stress is like, that's just part, the juggle, it's part of what you do when you're a parent, and so much of the stress does not need to be.
That's right.
Which is why raising these issues, which so rarely get discussed, is so pivotal.
Yep.
I think we probably have time for one more question.
Hi, sorry, I'm hiding behind the plant. First of all, thank you both so much. This is incredible. And I'm curious, you pointed to a little bit of the media problem of I don't really like her voice or something I just don't like about her. And I think we're seeing it even more as more women are running. You're seeing an AOC and she gets she's too young, she's too liberal, she needs to learn how to behave. And then you see an older woman like Hillary who's been in politics a long time. She's too much a part of the establishment, she's too rehearsed. And I'm curious, as people who have both sort of faced the media often, what it is you think we can do, those of us who aren't, hiring newsrooms, beyond just saying on Twitter, that's not an appropriate response, all of that is misogyny. What can any of us do to try and push back against that and try and sort of shape the conversation?
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting that you raise it that way because, and your point is dead on, but I would say Alexandria is giving as good as she's getting. And in many ways, she has completely turned the whole thing on its head.
Right.
And that's the way, in many ways, what we have to do. It's just things that we used to just have to sort of look askance at. We had no platform. We now have these social media platforms, and it's just, I almost feel like with her, and I don't want to speak for her, but every time they go after her, I feel like she just grows 5,000 feet taller, and it's really fantastic, and it's because I think people are supporting her, not just because she has her own, brilliant and witty and really incisive way of calling the question, but because people are actually responding, and I think we have to do that, and I think but it's true on a small level too, and I do think that's already happened with, when Elizabeth announced, I didn't really follow that much of Tulsi's announcement, certainly when Kirsten announced, assuming we have a couple more women, I think it's going to be saying, and what I love is that women are saying, quit talking about who, quit doing the horse race, let's just say, and I think every woman who's been announced, women are just saying, awesome, there's another woman running. I don't have to pick and choose right now. The great news is we've got multiple women running for the President of the United States, so let's hear what they have to say. We don't have to already start judging them for how their hair looks, what they're dressed like, any of this stuff. Just treat them as they are, as amazing, iconic women, and that's the job that we can do.
And I think we can also all check our own assumptions. I was with a friend recently at dinner, and she was like, the other night when I was watching Elizabeth Warren, I found myself thinking, there's something I don't like about her. And I then had to catch myself and say, what is that something? And I thought, that catching yourself thing, and I'm not saying that, we all need to support every female candidate if we don't agree with, how they campaign or what they stand for, but that checking yourself about that instantaneous snap judgment, I don't know that she would have done that a year ago. So I feel like we're much more likely to do that now, and that is very healthy. Plus, nothing makes me happier, by the way, I love AOC's Twitter feed, but nothing makes me happier than watching her and her fellow freshman congresswomen, like all banding together and having each other's backs. That is like, that sparks joy in me. To Marie Kondo. That's right. Agreed. Well, I think we might be at the end of our live cast. Prabal, is there anything else you want to ask us?
I have several questions, but as we're leading on to Women's March, I do want to address this particular issue that's been looming. As much as it's been one of the most inspiring moments for me, a few years back, divisive, I don't know, I'm trying to find the right word, you know what I'm talking about. But, so what is do you have any insight to that? What is going on? What can we do? Because we do want to be part of this movement, because the last thing that I want to do is for this current government to look at the, the division in the Women's March and say, see, we told you.
Yeah, I mean, that's not going to happen. Okay. That cannot happen, and it will not happen. I mean, I think, for those who might not have followed this or be watching, you're referring to some issues with the leadership of the National Women's March organization, and there have been accusations of anti-Semitism, which I, particularly as a Jewish woman, am troubled by and not fully satisfied with the leadership's response to. That having been said, I firmly believe that that issue can be separated from our collective desire to march wherever we want to, because that is an act of visible resistance. Mm-hmm. That having been said, I also think it's fine if somebody decides not to march because, as you've just been saying, there are so many other ways we are making our power felt right now. So, it's not like it is important for you as a card-carrying feminist to show up to march, but if you are inspired to do so, and I believe that hundreds of thousands of women will be, I think you can do so in good conscience, because I do think these are separate issues. That's my personal take.
Yeah, I agree, and I think women march, just like the first time, they march for a lot of different reasons. And again, women are not a monolith, and I think it is important that, yes, I'm sure that a lot of women will march, a lot of men will march with women and for women. But to me, the most important thing is exactly, I think, just kind of with this conversation, that it's like the march wasn't the end; it was the beginning. It was the sort of this moment in time that I think none of us will ever forget. And for those of us who are privileged enough to have been in Washington and even gotten to get up on that little stage and see just people for the, it changed everything in terms of our belief in ourselves and what we could do together collectively. And that is now getting expressed politically, culturally, I think through the Me Too movement, through the Time's Up movement, through the running for office, and I hope and believe it will absolutely change what happens in the next presidential election, because women will be heard and seen and participate in a way that maybe if we had two and a half years ago, things would have been different. But we're not going to make that mistake again, to be counted out or be on the sidelines. And so for that, I really want to thank all the people here and all across the country who made the first march possible and who continue to believe that we can, as a country, do better, and that we will do better.
And for anybody who's looking, who would look at this and say like, oh, there's this issue, that means, the women's movement is going to go away. Like, you wish. Not going to happen.
Can I just say one thing on that?
Please.
Just very quickly, my name's Paola, and there's a few of us in here that were the founders, co-founders of the Women's March. And I think what is really important to understand and know is that the Women's March is not the women's movement, and so that those two things can live together and live separately. So if you all decide to go out and march on Saturday, you're marching for the women's movement in conjunction with the complications that are obviously happening within the Women's March. And so I think that going out to march is not necessarily saying I stand in solidarity with the leadership of the Women's March or I stand against the Women's March leadership. It's saying I am a woman, I am here, I believe with all of these issues that I'm marching for. I disagree with these issues over here, and that our ultimate goal is to find freedom for all of us and to resist this current administration that is trying to oppress us, knock us down, and do all the horrible things that they've been trying to do and have failed to do in the past 2 years. So I think that I urge everyone to let that be your light on Saturday, whether you decide to march or not on Saturday in New York.
Can I add one small thing that's been, I work with Paola and Ginny. I would just say have these conversations with your friends. You know, there's a long history of tension between, you know, Black women and Jewish women and all women because, like you said, we're not a monolith, and these divisions and fractures happen by design. And I actually think, like, if we can spin it and look at it as a positive thing, we're having conversations that we've needed to have for a really long time, and the question is just, can we have better conversations? Can we listen to each other? Can we stay grounded in love? All that stuff. So go talk to your friends.
And it's okay to disagree. You know, that's not.
It's inherent.
It's encouraged.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm really thank you to both of you. You've been my heroes and super heroines, right? Let me just say that. And just to be able to share with all of you, and mainly through our audience, right? And it's been such a pleasure. It's an honor. I'm so grateful to you. I also think you both need a TV show. Yeah. I'm serious. CNC.
Close us out here. I am not going to be able to capture, so you have to recapture for everybody that fabulous line that you said at the Women's March 2 years ago, where you said, "One of us can be ignored."
Yeah. No, it was a great line, and everyone should steal it and use it. One of us can be ignored, two of us can be dismissed, but together we're a movement, and we're unstoppable.
Yes.
And